Minister, I know you're here to talk about places for children with autism. Obviously, parents sleeping out again in desperation trying to access places for their children in education. But before you do, I want to talk to you about the class of 2025 and the Leaving Cert. This year's class has been grossly disadvantaged by the way in which grade inflation is being rolled back from. Everyone accepts that grade inflation has to be rolled back on, but the way it is happening puts 2025, the kids studying right now for their Leaving Cert, at a significant disadvantage. Why?
Well, firstly, just can I acknowledge that it's already a very stressful time for children and for parents. And there are students, and I've met many of them over the last number of weeks and been in many schools where they're preparing, they're studying, they're doing their absolute best to achieve what they want to achieve.
Sure.
And that's to get the points that they want for the courses that they want. And I don't want them to be more stress on top of that stress because of changes that
because
are potentially taking place.
They know what is happening. And what is happening, for those who don't know, is that the CAO this year, 3/4 of them going into it are the class of 2025. They have grade inflation applied of 5.5%, and 1/4 of the under 23s going in are from last year, 10,000 of those, and from the previous 2 years, 5,000 of those. So you have 3/4 from 2025 and 1/4 from the years ahead, and they have two different sets of grade inflation, and there is a disparity. The class this year, if they get, let's just say, 100 points, their overall grade that they will actually be given is lower than the other quarter that are coming from previous years. That's unfair. That's not a level playing field, and we have never seen this before.
So, firstly, I think maybe just to outline, and I think you agree with this, and I've read your article this week as well, the inflation that happened was necessary. And I suppose the changes that happened during COVID was absolutely necessary to support children at the time. And you can look at other jurisdictions, to be honest, in Europe, it didn't really compare because they have much more continuous assessment and they were able to manage the exams.
But even if we take that, and even if we are both on the same page that it has to be rolled back,
absolutely,
this isn't a fair system.
Well, the only way that you can change it is by slightly adjusting it and doing it over time. And I know that there are suggestions out there, Minister, that we can do it in other ways.
And exactly. So it's not the only way. We still have, and I've spoken to education editors in the Irish Times and in the Independent and everything. And by the way, I have had hundreds, if not thousands, of messages since writing that article. It's one of the biggest articles in the paper this year from parents going, I am so worried and my child is so worried. It is not the only way. We still have the raw data from those previous years. You could apply the same weighting, the same grade inflation in the year people enter the CAO. That's a possibility. Why isn't that happening? Why aren't you allowing the class of 2025 to have a level playing field?
So the first thing I want to say to parents or to students who are listening, irrespective of this year or any other year, you look at the 2019 students who were at a disadvantage, you could say, to the 2020 students, irrespective of that or any other year, between 80 and 90% of students will always get their top three. So I just want to say that at the outset, it's not to not come back to your point, and I'm going to come back. But we know if you look at any of the changes, 2019 to 20, where those students were potentially disadvantaged because the grades went up, you still had. I want to come back to your point, Ciara, though.
But just let me address that. There was not 1/4 of the students in 2020 coming from 2019. In this year, 1/4 of the students in the CAO are from previous years.
So it is generally between 20 and 25. And I've looked at this, and I'm only a few weeks in the department, but I am very live.
I do accept that.
I am very live to this issue, and I've been looking at, and not just looking, I'm engaging with my department to see what has been done, how was this decision made last year, what engagement has happened with the higher education institutions, because ultimately what I have control over is the marks that we give, the assessment that takes place, and the piece of paper that's handed to students that's so important for them. What happens then on the other side is the responsibility of the higher institutions and the education facilities, our colleges and universities. Yeah. And there's been a huge amount of engagement with them prior to the decision that was taken last year by Minister Foley.
This comes down to rigidity in the CAO. If the CAO would allow a fairer system to take place to accommodate what happened in grade inflation, we wouldn't be in this situation. I know the background of all of this. I have looked into this. I'm across all of this probably as much as you are at this stage, Minister, because I have been engaged in this. And I will say to you, it's because I have a child in the class of 2025. There are fair ways of doing this. The way the departments have chosen is not fair. And it is going to disadvantage not only the class of 2025, but the class of 2026 is probably going to be even worse off.
Well, I suppose the class that we're looking at now has gone through 2 lockdowns. So the class next year would have gone through the second year in 2022. The class this year had actually two stages where they were locked down. So I absolutely acknowledge that they've had a really difficult time starting off in post-primary. the level of engagement that's happened with the secondary schools and the Department of Higher Education has, I suppose, presented to me the fact that their challenge and the reason that they have said that this can't change, and the proposals that you're putting forward is that you would essentially the legal basis to reduce the marks for students from last year. So if you were to apply, so let's just say, for instance, we were to progress with the 5.5% inflation, that's a reduction on the 7% for the last few years, and you were to apply that to students from last year, you are retrospectively changing students' grades who have already been handed their grades and already have them. The legal
They have
basis
two sets
to do
of grades, though,
the
and you
legal
and I know
basis to
that.
do that, though, I'm told is not there. So again, this is engagement that's happened prior. But what I'm trying to understand is that the case?
then
Are there any other options here
and
available
there is one
to
other
us?
option.
And how can we make this
there
less
is
of
one
an
other
impact on
option.
students?
If that's the argument against it, change it for the class of 2026 and apply the same grade inflation for the class of 2025, because you could change the legal basis to allow this to happen for next year, and that hasn't been signed off on yet. Doesn't happen for a number of weeks as far as I am aware, and I think I'm right on that. But the class of 2025 should then be given the same grade inflation to keep that as a level playing field across the board, and do it from next year when you've changed the legal standing. Everything else is unfair. There is no other way of saying that this is fair. What is happening to these kids is grossly unfair, and it will affect high achieving students this year. There are kids going for medicine who simply can't compete with the class of 2024.
So on that point, at the moment, you have students that are getting full grades and are not getting, whether it's medicine or anything else, because you have a system where it's essentially your name is picked. So you have students at the moment who are getting the highest grades possible, but not getting the choice, of course, that they want.
Yeah, that's great.
So that's great inflation too. And I mean, we have a world-renowned system that is well respected, and we need to make sure that our leaving cert continues in that vein. But you know, we need to look at what's fair here. And I've looked at the fact that the students this year, so if I was to keep it the same this year, you know, and just phase it out starting from next year, the cohort next year will have been impacted by COVID as well.
Not if you change that legal standing. But I just want to move. We're going to have to move on, but we're going to have to come back. This is a live issue for parents,
absolutely.
Minister. This isn't over.
Can I just say on that though, I'm very live to that fact. So I've spent the last couple of weeks, and I'm working with my officials.
Back and I'd like to hear from you.
I will absolutely.
I need to ask you about autism.
But I do need to say on this, we have to phase it out. We have to make sure that it's done. But I am absolutely determined that it's done in a way that's fair, that impacts students as little as possible, and that we do it in a way that maintains the status and upholds what is a well-respected leaving cert internationally as well as locally.
Let me ask you, there are 200 parents sleeping out in, I think it's fair to say, desperation, looking for places for their children with autism. Children in this country have a constitutional right to education. What is going to happen to change that situation so we do not see parents who are already to the pin of their collar trying to deal with children with additional needs who cannot get them into school, which is one of the most basic things any parent should be able to expect for their child?
Absolutely, and I don't want to see any parents sleeping outside. I've met many of the parents who are going to be there today and tonight, and I am doing everything in my power, working day and night, to make sure that their children have places.
Can you assure them that there will be places for all of them?
That is what I'm working towards. That is the commitment that I've given them, absolutely. And what I'm doing to actually achieve that, myself and Minister Moynihan, who's in the department with me, we've met with the NCSE, the National Council for Special Education, who is working with schools to roll out these places, not just weekly, probably 2 or 3 times a week. We're engaging with them. And already to date, so compared to this time last year, we have 80% more school places sanctioned, and work is underway to make sure that those schools are opening up their procedures so that children can enrol, but also that we can get the school places in place. So there's 369 additional classrooms have been approved already this year, and there's plans afoot by the end of this week that the remainder, I gave a commitment that 400 new additional education classrooms would be opened. The remainder of those, I hope, will be sanctioned by the end of this week. On top of that, we have new special schools, because what this is about, and look, I've not just met with parents, but I've also met students. I've met students who are in post-primary in secondary school, and they have said it's about the place that's right for them. So for some students, it's a special school. For others, it's an additional education classroom. For others, it's actually getting the resources within mainstream. And I am absolutely committed to doing that. I've said that to the parents who I met last week, and I do believe that we're getting better, but we need to be even better. So I've directed the NCSE, the National Council for Special Education, to start planning for next year now, to make sure that this time next year we have all of our places identified and that parents know exactly where their children are going.
Our text line has literally exploded, Minister, but we don't have time to get to them. I would like you to come back in and talk to us again, because parents' concerns concerns are real on all of these
And
issues.
I fully, I've had a lot of people on to me as well. I know students taking the exam, so I want this to be as fair as possible. I'm engaging with my department on it. I don't want to, and I can't give commitments on things here on air, but I'm working to see
Okay.
what can we do to make it as fair as possible.
Minister for Education and Youth, Helen McEntee, thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks, Ciara.